I tapped my knife against the crystal glass. The sound cut through the Christmas dinner chatter like a gunshot. 20 faces turned toward me. The room went dead silent. My mother had gone white as a corpse. My father's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. My sister Beth gripped the edge of the table like she was about to run. Good. They should be terrified. They knew exactly what was coming. $36,000. That number had been carved into my brain for 7 days, burning hotter with each passing hour. $36,000 I sent to keep my daughter alive and thriving while I dodged bullets in the desert. Money meant for Maya's food clothes future. Money they stole. Every single penny. The Mercedes in the driveway. The designer jewelry glittering on their wrists. The cruise brochures on the counter. All paid for with my daughter's stolen childhood. Maya sat at the far end of the table, 14 years old, shoulders hunched still, believing she was the burden they'd convinced her she was. She had no idea her own grandparents had spent a year bleeding her dry while I bled for my country. She didn't know they'd forced her to sell her dead father's necklace for a school trip while they booked $1,000 spa days. She didn't know yet, but in about 30 seconds everyone in this room would know, and I was going to enjoy watching their perfect little lies burn to ash. Before I continue, if you're enjoying this story of standing up against family betrayal and fighting for what's right, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this. Drop a comment below telling me what you would do in this situation. Your support means everything. Now let me take you back to where this all began 7 days earlier. I had been deployed for 12 months as a military intelligence operative in one of the most dangerous conflict zones in the world. 12 months of sandstorms that could strip paint off vehicles' gunfire echoing through the night like a deadly symphony, and the constant weight of knowing that every decision I made could mean life or death for my team. 12 months of sleeping in 4-hour shifts with my weapon within arm's reach. 12 months of missing my daughter's voice, her laugh, the way she'd curl up next to me on the couch with a book and read passages aloud, asking me what I thought about the characters' choices. I had volunteered for every dangerous mission that came across my commanding officer's desk. When they needed someone to go into hostile territory to gather intelligence, I raised my hand. When they needed someone to interrogate high-value targets, I stepped forward. When they needed someone to train local forces in areas where the previous trainer had been killed, I didn't hesitate. My team members thought I had a death wish, but the truth was simpler and more painful. Every dangerous mission came with hazard pay, combat pay, hardship allowances that could double or even triple my base salary. And every extra dollar went into one place, the account designated for Maya. $3,000. Every single month, like clockwork, transferred from my military account to my parents' bank account on the 15th. That was the arrangement we had agreed upon before my deployment, discussed over dinner at their house while Maya played in the backyard. I had shown them my budget breakdown, explained exactly how much it would cost to give Maya a comfortable life. Food utilities, school supplies, clothes, as she grew extracurricular activities, occasional treats, medical expenses, everything I could think of. I had calculated it meticulously, added a buffer for emergencies, and rounded up to make sure they'd never have to worry about covering expenses out of their own pocket. My mother had protested that it was too much. "Alex, honey, we don't need that much to take care of one teenager," she had said, setting her coffee cup down with a gentle clink. $2,000 would be more than plenty. I had insisted on $3,000. "Mom, I don't want Maya feeling like a burden. This money covers everything she needs plus extras. Anything left over goes into her college fund." My mother's eyes had lit up. Just for a second. A flash of something I missed then but saw clearly now in hindsight. Greed. "Oh, honey, that's far too much," she'd protested, but her hand was already reaching for the bank account information I'd written down. $2,000 would be plenty. $3,000, I'd repeated firmly. I want her comfortable, happy. I want her to have the childhood she deserves while I'm gone. My father had gripped my hand hard, looked me dead in the eye with that steady gaze I'd trusted my whole life. "We'll take excellent care of her, Alex. You have my word." "Maya will want for nothing." His voice had been so sincere, so convincing, a performance worthy of an Oscar. I had believed him. Every single word. 12 months later, I came home to my daughter's middle school graduation. Surprise arrival. I'd pulled every string, called in every favor to make it happen. When I walked through those auditorium doors in my dust-covered uniform, I expected to see my thriving, well-cared-for daughter. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. The flight from the Middle East to the United States took 23 hours with layovers. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maya's face from our last video call, before I deployed trying so hard to be brave, telling me she understood that I had to go, that she'd be fine with Grandma and Grandpa. She had been 13 then, still my little girl, despite her protests that she was practically grown. Now she was 14, finishing middle school, probably changed in ways I couldn't even imagine. I arrived at the school still wearing my dusty combat uniform, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder because I had come straight from the airport. I couldn't wait another moment, couldn't bear to stop at my parents' house first and risk missing even a second of seeing my daughter accept her diploma. The base of my neck ached from the long flight, my eyes burned from exhaustion, but adrenaline kept me moving forward. The ceremony was already underway when I slipped into the back of the auditorium, and I held my breath as I scanned the rows of students in their caps and gowns. The auditorium smelled like too many people in a closed-space cheap perfume and aftershave, and the peculiar scent of teenage anxiety. Parents around me held up phones and cameras recording every moment. I pushed through the crowd as politely as possible, looking for a gap where I could see the stage. Then I saw her. My Maya standing at the podium in her royal blue graduation gown, accepting an honor roll certificate from the principal. She looked so grown up, so mature, her hair longer than I remembered, pulled back in a neat braid that I didn't recognize. For a moment, my heart swelled with pride so intense it physically hurt. My daughter thriving despite my absence, my daughter succeeding. But then I really looked at her, my training as an intelligence operative, kicking in even in this emotional moment, teaching me to notice details that others might miss. Her gown was slightly too short, hitting her mid-calf instead of at her ankles like the other girls. It wasn't a style choice. She had grown since the gown was purchased probably months ago, and there hadn't been money to get a longer one. The dress underneath visible at the neckline and hem was one I recognized from 2 years ago. I had bought it for her for a school concert when she was 12. It had been loose, then room to grow. Now it was tight across her shoulders, the fabric faded from too many washings. A small stain near the collar that she had tried to hide with the gown. Her shoes, visible as she walked across the stage, were scuffed white sneakers that had seen better days. Not the nice flats or dress shoes that every other girl wore. Sneakers that were meant for gym class, not a formal ceremony. Something cold and sharp settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe my parents were just being frugal, saving the money for something more important, like a car for when Maya turned 16, or building up her college fund. Maybe Maya had insisted on wearing comfortable shoes because she didn't like fancy ones. There could be reasonable explanations. I tried to convince myself of that as I watched the rest of the ceremony, as I listened to speeches about the future and potential and seizing opportunities. But that cold feeling wouldn't go away, especially when I noticed other things. The way Maya's hair was pulled back in a simple braid instead of styled like many of the other girls. The fact that she wasn't wearing any jewelry, not even the simple gold cross necklace I had given her for her 12th birthday. The way she stood slightly apart from her classmates during the group photos, not quite fitting in with their polished, well-dressed excitement. When the ceremony ended and students flooded into the auditorium to find their families, I made my way down the aisle, my heart pounding. Maya was standing with a group of her classmates near the front, laughing at something someone had said, but even her laugh seemed different. More careful, more controlled, like she was performing the emotion rather than feeling it. I stopped about 10 feet away, just watching her drinking in every detail of this daughter I hadn't seen in person for a year. She had grown at least 3 inches, her face had thinned out, losing the last softness of childhood. She looked tired, I realized. Not just end-of-school year tired, but deeply exhausted, the kind of exhaustion I recognized from my own mirror after weeks of sleep deprivation in the field. Then she turned and saw me. For a split second, she just stared, her mouth falling open, her eyes going wide. Time seemed to freeze, the noise of the crowd fading to a distant hum. I watched the realization hit her, watched her brain process that I was really there, Not a hallucination or a wishful thought, but actually physically present. Then her face crumpled. The careful control shattered like glass, and she was suddenly my little girl again, all pretense of teenage coolness obliterated by pure emotion. She screamed, "Mom!" in a voice that was half sob, half shout, and launched herself toward me, shoving past her classmates with total disregard for anyone in her way. She crashed into me so hard we both staggered, and I dropped my duffel bag to catch her, wrapping my arms around her as tight as I could without crushing her. She was sobbing into my shoulder, her whole body shaking, and I realized I was crying too, tears streaming down my face as I held my daughter for the first time in 12 months. She smelled different, I noticed through my tears. Not the strawberry shampoo she had always loved, but something cheaper, more chemical. And she was lighter than she should be. I could feel her ribs more prominently than before, her shoulder blades sharp against my hands. "I'm home, baby," I whispered into her hair. "I'm home and I'm not leaving again. I promise." She couldn't speak, could only cry and hold on to me like I might disappear if she let go. Around us, I was dimly aware of other parents and students watching, some smiling at the reunion, others looking away to give us privacy. I didn't care. The whole world could watch for all I cared. My daughter was in my arms and nothing else mattered. Finally, after what might have been minutes or hours, Maya pulled back enough to look at my face. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying mascara smeared down her cheeks, but she was smiling through the tears. "You're really here," she said, her voice hoarse. "I thought you couldn't come home until January." "Surprise," I said, brushing her tears away with my thumbs. "Did you really think I'd miss this, my baby girl graduating middle school?" She laughed a watery, genuine sound and hugged me again. "I missed you so much, Mom. So much." I missed you too, sweetheart, every single day." We stood there together for a few more minutes, just holding each other until Maya's breathing calmed and she stopped crying. When she finally stepped back, she wiped at her face, laughing a little at the mess she must look like. "I probably look terrible now," she said. "You look beautiful," I told her honestly. And she did, despite the smeared makeup and red eyes and too short gown. She looked like my daughter, and that made her the most beautiful person in the world to me. It was then that I noticed we had attracted a small crowd of well-wishers. Several of Maya's teachers had come over, introducing themselves and shaking my hand, thanking me for my service. Maya's classmates clustered nearby, whispering and pointing, clearly impressed that their friend's mom had shown up in full military uniform. I smiled and thanked them and made small talk, but part of my attention was already scanning the auditorium for my parents. I found them still sitting in the front row, exactly where they had been during the ceremony. They hadn't rushed over to greet me. They hadn't even stood up. They just sat there, my mother gripping her purse in her lap, my father's hand on her shoulder, both of them staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read from this distance. But even from across the room, I could see the tension in their posture, the way my mother's knuckles were white from gripping her purse strap. Something was very, very wrong. "Come on, baby," I said to Maya, taking her hand. "Let's go say hi to Grandma and Grandpa." I felt her tense slightly, just a tiny flinch, but she nodded and led me through the crowd toward my parents. As we got closer, I studied them with the same careful attention I had given to interrogation subjects in the field. My mother, Martha, looked elegant as always in a navy dress and pearls. Her hair professionally styled, her makeup perfect, but her lipstick was slightly smeared at one corner like she had been chewing her lip. My father, Thomas, wore a crisp white button-down shirt and pressed khaki slacks, his silver hair neatly combed. But there was a muscle ticking in his jaw, and his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "Mom, Dad," I said, keeping my voice warm and happy despite the warning bells going off in my head. "Surprise?" My mother stood up with a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled me into a hug. "Alex, sweetheart, we had no idea you were coming." Her voice was too bright, too cheerful, the way people sound when they're trying very hard to seem normal. "This is such a wonderful surprise." My father hugged me too, his grip firm but brief, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Good to have you home, kiddo. You look thin. They feeding you out there?" I laughed, though nothing felt funny. "Military food isn't exactly gourmet, but it keeps you going. You both look great. New dress, Mom." She touched the navy fabric self-consciously. "Oh, this old thing, I've had it forever." That was a lie. I had never seen that dress before, and my mother wasn't the kind of woman to forget what was in her closet. It was expensive, too. Designer label, if I was any judge, probably $600 or $700 minimum. But I didn't say anything, just smiled and nodded. Maya had moved to stand beside my father, and I noticed the way she kept a careful distance from him, not quite touching, not quite relaxed. That wasn't right either. Before I deployed, Maya had been affectionate with her grandparents, always hugging them, sitting close, seeking their attention. Now she stood apart, her body language closed off and wary. "So, Maya," I said, turning to include her in the conversation and trying to sound casual, cheerful, like a mother who had just come home to her happy, well-cared-for child. "I've been thinking about that new laptop I promised you. With the money I've been sending every month, you should have more than enough saved up by now. We could go shopping this weekend. Get you something really nice for high school. What do you think?" I watched Maya's face carefully as I spoke, and what I saw made my blood run cold. She looked confused, genuinely confused, her eyebrows drawing together in that way they did when she was trying to work out a math problem. "What money, Mom?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. The auditorium suddenly felt too hot, the air too thick. "The money I've been sending, sweetheart. $3,000 every month for the past year." Maya's confusion deepened, her eyes widening. "Mom, I don't understand. Grandma and Grandpa said you couldn't afford to send anything because everything was so expensive over there. They said you had to sell your iPad and some of your stuff just to get by, and that taking care of me was expensive for them, too." The world tilted. Everything around me seemed to go quiet, all the celebrating families and chattering students fading to a distant buzz. I stared at my daughter, at her honest, confused face, and then slowly turned to look at my parents. My mother's face had drained of all color, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. My father had gone very still, his hand gripping the back of the folding chair in front of him so hard his knuckles were white. Behind them, I saw my sister Beth, who had been standing a few feet away, talking to her husband, suddenly start coughing loudly, violently, like she was choking on something. "Oh my goodness!" Beth said, her voice too loud in the suddenly quiet space around us. "I think something went down the wrong way." "Maya, congratulations, sweetie. You looked so beautiful up there on stage. We should all go out to celebrate. How about that new Italian restaurant everyone's been talking about? My treat." She was talking too fast, her words tumbling over each other, her face flushed. She grabbed her husband David's arm and started pulling him toward us, still chattering about restaurants and celebrations and what a special day this was. She was trying to create a distraction to divert attention from what I had just said, from Maya's confusion and my parents' obvious guilt. But I barely heard her. My entire focus had narrowed to my parents, and every skill I had developed over years of intelligence work was now fully engaged. I studied their body language, their micro-expressions, the tiny tells that most people would miss, but that had kept me alive in hostile interrogations. My mother was twisting her wedding ring around and around on her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since I was a child, one that only emerged when she was deeply anxious or lying. My father's breathing had changed, becoming shallower and faster. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead despite the air conditioning. And Beth, supposedly choking, but managing to talk non-stop, kept glancing between me and our parents with an expression that was pure panic. They had taken the money, all of it, and they had lied to my daughter, made her think I couldn't afford to help her, made her think she was a burden. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring fury in my ears. But I was trained to compartmentalize, to control my emotions, to think tactically even in crisis. So I took a deep breath, forced my face into a pleasant smile, and nodded at Beth's suggestion. "That sounds perfect," I said, my voice level and calm, betraying nothing of the storm raging inside me. "Let's go celebrate Maya's big day. We can all catch up over dinner." The relief on my parents' faces was obvious and disgusting. They actually thought they'd gotten away with it, that I would just let the subject drop, that everything would go back to normal. They didn't know me at all anymore. Or maybe they never had. We gathered up Maya's things, her diploma and certificate, and the small bouquet of flowers my mother claimed to have bought for her, though I noticed the flowers were grocery store quality, nothing like the elaborate arrangements other families were carrying. We headed out to the parking lot, and that's when I saw it. The Mercedes-Benz GLE SUV sitting in the spot closest to the school entrance, gleaming silver in the afternoon sunlight. It still had the temporary dealer plates on it, the kind that meant it had been purchased within the last month. My father clicked the key fob and the lights flashed, and I realized with a sick jolt that this was his car. This $70,000 luxury vehicle was what my parents were now driving. I said nothing, just filed the information away, adding it to the growing list of evidence that was building in my mind. Maya climbed into my father's car because that's where she always rode, she explained, since they had sold her old sedan, because it was having too many problems and wasn't worth fixing. I rode with Beth and David in their much more modest Toyota, letting them fill the silence with nervous chatter about nothing important, while I stared out the window and planned my next moves. Dinner was excruciating. We sat at a large round table at Salvatore's, the Italian restaurant Beth had mentioned, which was indeed new and expensive based on the prices on the menu. Everyone ordered carefully except my parents, who seemed to have no problem ordering appetizers and wine and entrees without even glancing at the prices. I watched my father order a $50 steak without hesitation, saw my mother choose the seafood special that cost $45. Maya ordered the cheapest pasta dish on the menu, $12, and when I suggested she get something more substantial, she insisted that was all she wanted. Throughout the meal, I asked careful questions, keeping my tone light and curious, watching reactions. I asked about Maya's year, and she talked about school, her classes, her friends, but in vague general terms, that told me nothing specific. I asked about activities, and she mentioned that she had stopped playing soccer. "Why did you quit, baby?" I asked, genuinely confused. Maya had loved soccer, had played since she was 6 years old, had talked about trying out for the high school varsity team. She glanced at my mother before answering. "I just didn't have time anymore," she said quietly. "I got a job at a cafe, and the hours conflicted with practice." A job. My 14-year-old daughter had a job. "A job," I repeated, working hard to keep my voice neutral. "That's very responsible of you, but couldn't you have done soccer and worked just a few hours on weekends?" "The uniform fees were expensive," Maya said, staring at her pasta. "And I needed the money for other things, school supplies and stuff." My father jumped in, his voice hearty and false. "We encouraged Maya to get a job to teach her responsibility and work ethic. You know how important those values are, Alex. She's learning what it means to earn her own money, to understand the value of a dollar." I smiled at him, a cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course, Dad. Work ethic is so important. Though I'm surprised you had her working during the school year. That must have been hard on her grades." "Her grades are fine," my mother said quickly. Too quickly. Another lie, I could hear it in her voice. Maya didn't contradict her, but she also didn't agree. She just kept eating her pasta in small, careful bites, her eyes down her shoulders, slightly hunched. She looked like someone who had learned to make herself small to take up as little space as possible to avoid drawing attention. My daughter, my brave, vibrant, confident daughter, had been turned into this quiet, careful, diminished version of herself. And my parents had done it while spending the money I sent to keep her safe and happy. After dinner, everyone was exhausted from the big day, so we agreed to head back to my parents' house. I rode with them this time, Maya, between me and my mother in the back seat, my father driving. I kept up a steady stream of light conversation, asking about their lives, their friends, their plans for Christmas. And I noticed things. The new GPS system built into the car's dashboard, the leather seats that had that new car smell, the way my father's fingers drummed on the steering wheel in nervous rhythm. When we pulled into their driveway, I saw more changes. The house looked the same from the outside, but when we went inside, everything was different. The old, comfortable couch that had been in the family for 20 years was gone, replaced by a massive leather sectional that must have cost thousands. The TV had been upgraded from a modest 40-inch to an enormous 75-inch curved screen mounted on the wall. New curtains, new rugs, new artwork. Everything was expensive. Everything was shiny and new. "Wow," I said, looking around. "You guys have really updated things. This must have cost a fortune." "Oh, well, you know," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. "We'd been saving up for a while. After you kids grew up and moved out, we finally had the time and money to invest in making the house nice for us. Another lie. I could see it in the way she wouldn't quite look at me, the way her hand fluttered near her throat, touching the pearl necklace that was also new, I realized. Real pearls, not the cheap costume jewelry she used to wear. That's wonderful, I said sweetly. You deserve to enjoy yourselves. All those years of raising Beth and me and then taking care of Maya, you should absolutely spend money on things that make you happy. The barb hit home. I saw my mother flinch, saw my father's jaw tighten. Good. I wanted them uncomfortable. I wanted them worried. That night, I slept in the guest room with Maya. She had apparently moved into the smaller guest room instead of staying in my old childhood bedroom, which I found out had been converted into my mother's craft room. We laid in the double bed together, Maya curled against my side, the way she used to when she was little and had nightmares, and in the darkness, she finally started to really talk. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so glad you're home. This year was really hard." "Tell me, baby," I said softly. "Tell me everything. I want to know." And she did. The words came pouring out like she'd been holding them in for months, maybe the whole year. She told me about her job at Cafe Luna, how she worked 15 to 20 hours a week after school and on weekends. She told me about the owner, Mrs. Garcia, who was kind but couldn't afford to pay her more than minimum wage. She told me about using that money to buy school supplies because my mother said they couldn't afford the expensive folders and calculators and art supplies that her classes required. She told me about her clothes, how she'd grown out of most of what she had, and my mother kept saying they'd go shopping soon, but soon never came. She told me about wearing the same few outfits over and over, washing them by hand in the bathroom sink, so she'd have something clean to wear, about how the other kids noticed, and some of them made comments. She told me about the necklace. My late husband's necklace, the one he had given her when she was 8 years old. A delicate gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a music note because she had loved to sing. She had worn it every day for years, never taking it off except to shower. But last spring, her class had planned a field trip to Washington, D.C., an educational trip to see the Smithsonian museums and the Capitol. The cost was $400 per student. Grandma said we couldn't afford it, Maya whispered into the darkness. She said it was a luxury we couldn't justify when there were real bills to pay. But Mom, everyone was going, all my friends, and I really wanted to see the museums. So I took Dad's necklace to a pawn shop and they gave me $300 for it. I used my savings from work for the rest. I felt something break inside me, a clean snap like a bone fracturing. My daughter had sold the last physical reminder of her father, the man who had died when she was 9. The man whose memory she treasured because my parents told her they couldn't afford a school trip while they were driving a Mercedes and buying diamond jewelry. "Maya," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to control it. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me any of this?" "I tried," she said, and now she was crying softly. "I tried to tell you during our video calls, but Grandma was always right there listening, and whenever I started to say something about money or needing things, she'd shake her head at me really hard, and I knew I wasn't supposed to say anything. She told me you were going through a hard time, that money was really tight for you, that I shouldn't burden you with asking for things. She said you'd sent a little money when you could, but it wasn't much, barely enough to cover the basics, and that they were struggling to make ends meet with an extra person in the house." My mother had coached her, had actively prevented my daughter from telling me the truth, had made her feel guilty for existing, for needing things, for being alive and requiring care. And the worst part, Maya continued, her voice breaking, was that they kept saying it over and over about how expensive I was, how much it cost to feed a teenage girl, how much the utilities went up with me taking showers and doing laundry, how I ate so much food. Grandma would sigh every time she bought groceries like it was this huge burden. She'd say things like, "Well, I guess we'll have to skip our dinner out this week since we need to buy school supplies for you." Or, "We can't afford to fix the leak in the roof because we're spending so much on your needs." I felt so guilty, Mom. I felt like I was ruining their lives just by existing. I held my daughter tighter, my own tears soaking into her hair, and I made a silent promise. I was going to make them pay. Not just pay back the money, though, that would definitely happen. I was going to make them face consequences for every lie, every manipulation, every moment of pain they had caused my child. But first, I needed evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence that would stand up in court if necessary. Because I wasn't just going to confront them in private and let them deny it. I was going to make sure everyone knew what they had done. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, a habit from my military service that I couldn't break even when I wanted to. Maya was still sleeping her face peaceful for the first time since I'd seen her at graduation. I slipped out of bed, carefully pulled on my clothes, and grabbed my phone. I logged into my military bank account and took screenshots of everything. Every transfer, every transaction, every record of the $36,000 I had sent. Then I called my military banking representative and requested official statements certified and notarized showing the full history of transfers to my parents' account. I explained that I needed them for legal purposes and asked for expedited processing. The representative, probably sensing the seriousness in my voice, agreed to have them ready by the end of the business day. Next, I searched for a legal assistance office near the base I'd be reporting to after my leave. I found one and sent an email explaining my situation in broad terms, requesting an appointment as soon as possible. Within an hour, I had a response. Captain Jennifer Torres, a JAG officer specializing in family law, would see me that afternoon if I could make it to the base. Then came the harder part. I needed to document Maya's situation, and I needed witnesses who could testify to what they had observed. I made a list. Kate Morrison, Lily's mom, who Maya had mentioned as being kind to her, Mrs. Patterson, the school guidance counselor, Mrs. Garcia at the cafe, Maya's teachers, anyone who had seen what was happening and could provide an objective account. I started with Kate Morrison. I found her number in Maya's phone contacts and sent her a text explaining who I was and asking if I could meet with her today. Her response came within minutes. Absolutely, come by any time. I have a lot to tell you about Maya's year. After breakfast, which was awkward and tense with my parents watching my every move, I told them I wanted to take Maya shopping for some new clothes. My mother immediately offered to come along. "Oh, no, Mom, that's okay," I said with a bright smile. "You've been dealing with teenage shopping trips all year. I want some one-on-one time with my daughter. We'll be back for dinner." I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes quickly hidden. She didn't want me alone with Maya, didn't want me to hear whatever truths might come out without supervision. But she couldn't protest without seeming controlling, so she just nodded and said to have fun. In the car, I turned on my phone's voice recorder and set it on the dashboard. "Maya, honey, I'm recording our conversation because I want to remember everything you tell me about your year. Is that okay with you?" "Sure, Mom," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "So tell me more about your job," I said as I pulled out of the driveway. "When did you start working?" And for the next hour as I drove through town running errands, Maya talked, and I recorded every word. She told me about applying for the job in February because she needed money for new shoes. Her old ones had holes in them and were causing blisters. She told me about working after school from 4 to 8, then coming home to do homework until midnight or later. She told me about falling asleep in class because she was so tired. She told me about teachers expressing concern about the school calling my parents in for meetings about my father telling everyone that Maya was working to build character and learn responsibility not out of necessity. She told me about selling the necklace, and this time she gave me more details. The pawn shop owner had offered her $200 at first, but she had bargained up to $300 by showing him the appraisal paperwork I had kept with the necklace, proving it was worth much more. She told me about crying the whole walk home, about hiding the money in her room, about lying to my mother and saying she had decided not to go on the trip after all because she didn't want to miss school. "But then Grandma found the money," Maya said. "She was putting laundry away and I guess it fell out of my drawer. She asked where it came from and I told her. And Mom, she got so mad. She said I should have asked permission before selling something that valuable. She said I was irresponsible and ungrateful. But then she made me give her the money for safekeeping until the trip, but when the trip came, she said I couldn't go anyway because I had missed the registration deadline, which wasn't true. The deadline wasn't for another week. I think she kept the money. $300. My mother had taken $300 from a 14-year-old girl money that came from selling her dead father's necklace and just kept it. The evidence was piling up, getting worse with every revelation. Our first stop was Kate Morrison's house. Kate was a warm woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She hugged Maya tight when we arrived, then invited us into her kitchen. Lily, Maya's best friend, immediately pulled Maya upstairs to her room, leaving Kate and me alone. Mrs. Morrison, I began, but she stopped me. Call me Kate, please. And listen, Alex, I'm glad you're here. I've been worried sick about Maya all year. That girl has been through hell. Tell me everything, I said, pulling out a notebook. And please be specific. Dates if you remember them, exact details of what you saw and heard. Kate didn't hold back. She told me about the first time she really noticed something was wrong back in January. Maya had come over for a play date wearing the same clothes she'd worn 3 days in a row. When Kate gently asked about it, Maya said she was just really attached to that outfit. But Kate had noticed the grass stains, the small tear in the knee of the jeans, the way Maya kept tugging the too short sleeves down over her wrists. She told me about February when the winter coat incident happened. Maya had come to school without a coat, despite temperatures in the 20s, claiming she'd forgotten it at home. But she'd been forgetting it for weeks. When Kate asked Maya directly in private, Maya admitted her coat didn't fit anymore and the zipper was broken, but Grandma said they'd get a new one soon. Kate went out that afternoon and bought Maya a new winter coat, lying and saying Lily had outgrown it. She told me about offering to help financially, about calling my mother, and offering to pay for Maya to join their family on small outings to the movies or bowling. My mother had refused coldly, saying they were managing just fine and didn't need charity, thank you very much. But Maya wasn't being included in anything that cost money. She couldn't go to birthday parties if they were at places like trampoline parks or escape rooms because she didn't have money for the entrance fee. She missed out on the 8th grade formal dance because she couldn't afford the ticket and dress. The worst part, Kate said, her eyes filling with tears, was watching her just accept it. She stopped asking to do things. She stopped talking about wanting things. She became this quiet, withdrawn version of herself. The Maya I knew from years of playdates, this bright, funny, energetic kid, just disappeared. She became invisible, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible in the world. Kate wrote everything down in a detailed statement, 4 pages of observations with dates and specifics. She signed it and dated it, and I made several copies right there on her home printer. Next, I took Maya shopping, really shopping. I told her to pick out anything she wanted, anything at all, no budget. At first, she was hesitant, reaching for clearance items and sale racks, checking price tags before even looking at the clothes themselves. But gradually, as I kept encouraging her, kept putting things in the cart without hesitation, she began to relax. We bought jeans that actually fit her shirts in colors she loved, a proper winter coat, shoes that weren't falling apart, everything she needed and more. In the dressing room, I saw things that broke my heart all over again. Her bras were too small, digging into her shoulders, clearly sized for a younger girl. Her underwear was worn thin, some with holes. The clothes she was wearing under the things she tried on were shabby and ill-fitting, and I realized these were probably the best things she owned. If these were what she wore for a special shopping trip with her mother, what was she wearing to school every day? We bought it all. New clothes from the skin out enough to fill her closet. I spent over $2,000 without blinking, and Maya actually cried in the dressing room when she saw herself in clothes that fit properly, that were new and nice, and made her look like the other kids at school. After shopping, I told Maya I needed to make a quick stop at the school. She looked nervous, but didn't protest. At the administrative office, I asked to speak with Mrs. Patterson, Maya's guidance counselor. The secretary made a call, and 5 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a gentle face came out to meet us. "Ms. Vance," she said, shaking my hand. "It's good to meet you. Maya has spoken of you often." "I need to talk to you about Maya's year," I said directly. "In private, if possible." Mrs. Patterson's face grew serious. She glanced at Maya, then back at me. "Maya, why don't you wait in the library? I think Mrs. Chen is still there, and she'd love to see you." Once Maya was gone, Mrs. Patterson led me to her office and closed the door. "I'm glad you came in," she said before I could even speak. "I've been very concerned about Maya this year." She pulled out Maya's file thick with papers and walked me through it. Maya's GPA had dropped from a 4.0 to a 3.2. Her standardized test scores were still high, showing she was capable, but her actual grades had tanked. Teachers had noted that she fell asleep in class multiple times. She had missed assignments because she didn't have the required materials, things like art supplies or specific calculators or books that weren't in the school library. Mrs. Patterson showed me the records of phone calls and emails to my parents. 17 attempts to contact them between February and November. My father had responded to 3, always with the same message. Maya was working to learn responsibility. They were teaching her about work ethic and financial management. She was fine. We even had a meeting in May, Mrs. Patterson said, pulling out her notes. Your father came in alone. I expressed our concerns about Maya's exhaustion, her declining grades, the signs we were seeing that suggested financial stress. He was very defensive. He said Maya was dramatic, that she was complaining unnecessarily, that they were providing everything she needed, and she was just resentful about having to work like other teenagers. Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped. But I didn't believe him. I've been doing this job for 25 years, and I know the signs of a child who's struggling. I even contacted CPS for a consultation, but without evidence of abuse or neglect beyond academic struggle, there wasn't much they could do. Your parents weren't starving her or beating her. They were just making her life unnecessarily hard while claiming it was for her own good. She printed out copies of everything. Emails, call logs, meeting notes. Maya's grades, teacher comments. It was all there, a paper trail showing that the school had noticed and tried to intervene, but my parents had blocked them at every turn. My final stop of the day was Café Luna. It was a small family-owned place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. Mrs. Garcia, the owner, was a tiny woman who couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, with graying hair pulled back in a bun and dark eyes that missed nothing. You are Maya's mama, she said the moment I walked in, not a question but a statement. She has your eyes. Sit. I get you coffee. I sat at a corner table and waited while she bustled behind the counter. When she returned with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of cookies, she sat across from me and fixed me with an intense stare. Your daughter is a good girl, she said firmly. Very good girl, too good. She works too hard, takes too much responsibility. I worry for her. Tell me about her work here, I said. Mrs. Garcia didn't need any encouraging. She told me Maya had come in back in February with a handwritten resume asking if there were any positions available. At 14, she was technically old enough to work with parental permission, and she had a signed permission slip from my parents. Mrs. Garcia had been looking for help during after-school rush hours, so she hired her. At first, just a few hours, maybe 6 hours a week, Mrs. Garcia said. But then Maya asks for more hours. She needs money for school, she says, for supplies, for clothes. I think, okay, teenagers always want money, but then I noticed things. She noticed that Maya wore the same clothes over and over. She noticed that Maya sometimes came to work straight from school and hadn't eaten lunch, so Mrs. Garcia started accidentally making extra food and giving it to her. She noticed the holes in Maya's shoes, the way she was always tired, the way she'd sometimes just sit in the back room during her break with her head down, too exhausted to even eat the food Mrs. Garcia gave her. In September, she asks me for extra shifts, Mrs. Garcia continued. She needs to save money for school clothes, she says. I give her what I can, but I also talk to her. I ask about her grandparents, why they not buying her clothes. She tells me they don't have much money, that her mama can't send money because military don't pay good. And I believe her, because why would she lie? Mrs. Garcia's face hardened. But then I see her grandmother come in here one day in October. She doesn't know I own this place, doesn't know Maya works here. She comes in with another lady, both dressed very nice, expensive purses, jewelry. They order the most expensive things on menu and don't even look at prices. They sit and drink wine and laugh. And I think this woman has no money. This woman makes her granddaughter work after school. Something is very wrong. She had started keeping detailed records after that. Every shift Maya worked, every time she seemed too tired or hungry or stressed, every conversation they had where Maya mentioned needing money for something. Mrs. Garcia gave me copies of everything, work schedules, paychecks, and her own handwritten notes documenting what she had observed. You take this, she said, pressing the envelope into my hands. You protect your baby. She deserves better than what she has been getting. By the time I picked up Maya and headed back to my parents' house, it was almost 6 in the evening. My phone was full of evidence my car had bags of new clothes and supplies, and my mind was full of rage that I was carefully, meticulously controlling. I had one more stop to make before I could even think about confronting my parents. The legal assistance office on base was still open when I arrived, and Captain Jennifer Torres was waiting for me. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with black hair pulled back in a tight bun and a handshake that could crack walnuts. I spent 2 hours in her office laying out everything I had discovered, showing her every piece of evidence I had gathered. Captain Torres listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and steepled her fingers, silent for a long moment. "This is bad," she finally said. "This is really bad. What your parents have done is theft, clear and simple. They had a fiduciary duty to use that money for Maya's benefit, and instead, they used it for personal enrichment. Depending on how aggressive you want to be, we could pursue several different avenues." She laid out my options: criminal charges for theft, which would likely result in prosecution and possible jail time; civil charges for breach of fiduciary duty and emotional distress, which would result in a lawsuit and judgment for financial damages. Or I could handle it privately, drafting a legal agreement that spelled out repayment terms and consequences for non-compliance, essentially holding the threat of legal action over their heads to ensure they paid back every penny. "What I recommend," Captain Torres said, "is that you give them one chance to make it right privately. Draft a formal agreement, present it with all your evidence, and make it crystal clear that if they don't comply, you will pursue every legal remedy available. Criminal and civil. If they're smart, they'll agree. If they're not, you have everything you need to bury them in court." She spent the next hour drafting documents: a formal demand letter outlining the theft and requesting immediate repayment, a repayment agreement with specific terms including interest and penalties for missed payments, and most importantly, a detailed legal memorandum outlining the potential criminal and civil charges I could bring, including estimated financial damages and the likelihood of prosecution based on the evidence. "One more thing," Captain Torres said as I was leaving. "You'll want to file for formal custody modification. Right now, you have primary custody, but your parents have been acting as temporary guardians during your deployment. Make it official that they have no legal authority over Maya whatsoever. I'll draft those papers too." I drove back to my parents' house with a folder full of legal documents, a car full of shopping bags, and a heart full of cold determination. Tonight was not the night for confrontation. Tonight was still about gathering information about playing the role of the grateful daughter who suspected nothing. But soon, very soon, I was going to rain down consequences they couldn't imagine. Over the next few days, I continued my investigation while maintaining the facade of normalcy. I smiled at breakfast. I helped my mother in the kitchen. I watched football with my father. And I noticed everything. I noticed that my father's new SUV had every luxury option available: heated and cooled, seats, premium sound system, advanced safety features, navigation, the works. I looked up the exact model online and found that with all those options, it would have cost at least $65,000. I noticed the jewelry my mother wore casually around the house. Real sapphires, real diamonds, real gold. Thousands of dollars hanging from her ears and neck and wrists like it was nothing. I noticed the cruise brochures on my father's desk: 7 nights in the Caribbean balcony suite, specialty dining package excursions at every port, $11,000 for 2 people scheduled to depart in 6 weeks. I noticed that Beth came over for dinner twice that week, and each time she wore new expensive items. The diamond bracelet that had to cost at least $3,000. A designer purse that I knew retailed for $1,500. A watch that was definitely a Cartier, probably $5,000 minimum. And I noticed how they all acted around me. Nervous, jumpy, overly cheerful. My mother couldn't hold eye contact for more than a few seconds. My father kept steering conversations away from anything to do with money or the past year. Beth talked incessantly about nothing, filling every silence with chatter about her job and her husband and neighborhood gossip. Anything to avoid the topic of Maya. On the 3rd night, I waited until everyone was asleep and then put my Special Forces training to use. I picked the lock on my father's home office door with a tension wrench and pick I'd fashioned from bobby pins, a skill I'd learned in an advanced interrogation course. Inside, I had hours to work undisturbed. His filing cabinet gave up its secrets easily. Bank statements for the past year showing deposits from me and corresponding withdrawals for major purchases. Credit card statements showing thousands of dollars in charges at department stores, jewelry stores, restaurants, furniture stores. Purchase receipts carefully filed and organized. My father's engineer brain unable to break the habit of documentation even when he was committing theft. But the smoking gun was in his desk drawer. A spreadsheet printed out and annotated in his handwriting with 2 columns. The first column was labeled Received from Alex and listed every $3,000 deposit with the date. The second column was labeled Allocation and detailed how that money had been spent. January, new bedroom furniture $2,800. February, Martha's birthday, jewelry $3,200. March, car down payment $5,000. April living room renovation $4,500. May, Mediterranean cruise canceled refund $3,000 applied to June expenses. June car final payment $7,000. July, Beth's birthday gift $2,500. August TV and electronics $3,800. September, Caribbean cruise deposit $5,000. October, Martha's anniversary jewelry $2,800. November, Thanksgiving decorations and hosting expenses $1,200. He had tracked every penny. He knew exactly how much he had stolen and exactly what he had spent it on. There was no way he could claim it was an accident or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated theft committed over months with full knowledge and planning. I photographed every page, every receipt, every statement. I copied files from his computer onto a flash drive. By the time I left that office 3 hours later, I had enough evidence to put them in prison if I wanted to. The next day was Christmas Eve. The house was full of activity as my mother prepared for the family dinner the next night. Beth came over to help with preparations, and I volunteered to assist as well, playing the role of helpful daughter. As we worked in the kitchen, I listened to them talk. "I can't believe she hasn't said anything more about the money," my mother whispered to Beth when she thought I was in the pantry out of earshot. "Do you think she believed us that she was confused?" "I don't know, Mom," Beth whispered back. "But we need to be careful. Alex isn't stupid. You should have seen her face when Maya said she didn't know about the money. She looked ready to murder someone." "Well, what was I supposed to do?" My mother's voice was defensive and whiny. "You know how expensive everything is these days, and we'd already committed to buying the car. I couldn't back out of that. And you needed help with your credit card debt, and your father needed the cruise for his stress, and—" I know, Beth interrupted. "Just keep playing it cool. Once she goes to her new base, she'll forget about it. Or at least she won't have time to dig into it." They had no idea I was recording everything on my phone, carefully positioned on the counter near the stove where they couldn't see it. Christmas morning arrived, and with it came the arrival of extended family for dinner. My Aunt Susan, my father's older sister, and the family matriarch arrived first with her husband. Then came various cousins with their spouses and children until the house was full of people and noise and the smell of cooking food. I had spent the morning carefully setting up. I had 3 leather portfolios prepared, each containing the same sets of documents, bank statements, photographs, witness statements, legal documents, and most damning of all, photographs of my father's spreadsheet showing exactly how he had allocated my money. 1 portfolio for my parents. 1 for Aunt Susan, whose opinion carried weight in the family and whose disapproval was something my parents actually feared. And 1 for me to reference during what was about to happen. Dinner was at 6. The dining room table had been extended to its full-length seating 20 people comfortably. My mother had gone all out with the decorations and food, probably spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on this one meal. Ham and turkey and a standing rib roast. 5 different side dishes. 3 kinds of pie. Wine flowing freely. It was excessive and extravagant, and every dollar of it had been stolen from my daughter. I waited until everyone had eaten, until the plates were cleared, and people were relaxed and laughing, full of food and wine. Then I stood up, my wine glass in hand, and tapped it gently with my knife. The conversations died away one by one as people turned to look at me. "I want to make a toast," I said, my voice clear and carrying easily in the sudden quiet. My hands were steady, my heart rate calm. I had faced down armed insurgents and hostile interrogations. A family dinner was nothing. To family, to the people we trust most in the world, the people who are supposed to protect us, care for us, sacrifice for us. Everyone raised their glasses, smiling. Everyone except my parents, who had frozen in their seats, and Beth, whose face had gone pale as milk. They knew. Somehow they knew what was coming, and they were terrified. I spent 12 months in a war zone. I continued, my voice taking on steel. 12 months away from my daughter, missing every moment of her life, putting myself in danger every single day. 12 months of volunteering for the most dangerous missions so I could earn extra pay, because I knew that money was keeping my baby girl safe and happy and cared for while I was gone. I walked around the table until I stood behind Maya's chair, placing my hands on her shoulders. She looked up at me confused, scared, not understanding what was happening. I gave her shoulders a gentle squeeze. I sent $3,000 every month to my parents, I said, letting each word fall like a hammer. $36,000 over the course of a year, money that was specifically explicitly designated for Maya's care, for her food, her clothes, her school supplies, her activities, everything she needed to live comfortably and happily. The room was dead silent now. I saw Aunt Susan set down her wine glass, her face suddenly alert and serious. My cousins were looking at each other in confusion, not understanding where this was going. Maya, I said gently, looking down at my daughter, tell everyone what Grandma and Grandpa told you about money this year. Mom, she whispered, please don't make me. It's okay, baby. Everyone needs to hear this. Tell them what you were told. She took a shaky breath, tears already forming in her eyes. They said Mom couldn't afford to send money because things were expensive and hard where she was. They said she had to sell her iPad and other stuff just to get by. They said taking care of me was really expensive for them, that I cost a lot in food and utilities and everything. They said I should be grateful and not ask for anything extra because money was tight. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. I saw shock on faces, confusion, dawning horror as people started to understand what I was revealing. And what did you do, sweetheart, when you thought there was no money? Her voice broke. I got a job. I worked 15 to 20 hours a week after school at Cafe Luna. I used that money to buy my own school supplies and clothes. I sold Dad's necklace to get money for the Washington, D.C. field trip, but Grandma took that money and I couldn't go anyway. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I quit soccer because we couldn't afford the uniform fees. I stopped doing anything with my friends that cost money. I tried to make myself as small as possible, tried not to be a burden, but it was never enough. They still made me feel like I was this huge expense they couldn't afford. My mother was crying too now, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, only cold satisfaction that the truth was finally coming out. I walked to where my leather portfolios sat on the side table and picked them up. $36,000, I repeated, holding up the folders. Let me show you all where that money actually went. I placed one folder in front of my parents, one in front of Aunt Susan, and opened mine. Everyone please follow along. Bank statements showing every deposit from my account to theirs, $3,000 on the 15th of every month, January through December. Now look at the withdrawals. I gave them time to flip through the pages, watching as comprehension dawned on face after face. January through March, purchases totaling nearly $12,000. New bedroom furniture, jewelry, car down payment. I pulled out photographs from my folder. Here's the furniture purchased from Anderson's Fine Home Furnishings on February 3rd. $8,200 for a bedroom set that Maya never even saw because she wasn't allowed in Grandma's newly redecorated room. I laid out more photographs. April and May, another $11,000. Living room furniture, electronics, car payments. I pointed to the leather sectional everyone was currently sitting near. This couch, purchased May 15th for $7,800 while Maya was wearing shoes with holes in them. My voice got harder, colder. June through August, the final car payments and more jewelry. That Mercedes in the driveway, the one with all the luxury options, $65,000 total. The money I sent for 3 months paid for half of it. Alex, please, my mother started, but I cut her off with a look. I'm not finished. September through November, more jewelry, the cruise deposit, hosting expenses for Thanksgiving. Not a single dollar spent on Maya. Not for clothes, not for school supplies, not for activities, nothing. I pulled out the final, most damning piece of evidence. And here's the best part. My father's own spreadsheet documenting exactly how he allocated each month's deposit. Every purchase tracked and categorized. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was calculated, deliberate theft. I turned to address the whole table. While they were buying luxury cars and jewelry, my daughter was working as a child laborer to buy her own school supplies. While they were planning Caribbean cruises, she was selling her dead father's necklace to pay for a field trip. While they were renovating their house, she was wearing the same 3 outfits over and over until the other kids at school noticed and made fun of her. Aunt Susan stood up slowly, her face red with fury. She picked up her folder and threw it on the table in front of my father. "Thomas," she said, her voice shaking, "I knew you could be selfish. I knew you could be small-minded and petty. But this is beyond anything I ever imagined. This is your granddaughter, your own flesh and blood. You don't understand how expensive things are." My father started, but Aunt Susan cut him off with a sharp gesture. Don't you dare! I raised 3 children on a teacher's salary. I know exactly how expensive things are. And I know that $36,000 is more than enough to care for one teenager in comfort. You didn't just take advantage. You actively harmed that child. You made her believe she was worthless, that she was a burden. You destroyed her sense of security and self-worth for a car and some jewelry. My cousin Marco, Aunt Susan's oldest son, stood up too. "Uncle Thomas, is this true? Did you really do this?" My father's face had gone from white to red, his eyes blazing. He stood up his chair, scraping back loudly. "How dare you question me? How dare you come into my house and accuse me like this? I raised Alex, I clothed her and fed her for 18 years. If I wanted to use some of that money for myself, I was entitled to it. It was my due for all those years of sacrifice." The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some in shock, some in anger. My mother was sobbing. Beth was staring at her plate like she wished she could disappear into it. "You're due," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Everyone fell silent again. Your due was the love and gratitude of a daughter who appreciated everything you did for her. Your due was the trust I placed in you when I left my most precious person in your care. Your due was the honor of helping raise your granddaughter. You don't get to steal from a child and call it payment for being a parent. That's not how this works. I pulled out another envelope, the one from Captain Torres. This is from my attorney, Captain Jennifer Torres, of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. It outlines the potential criminal charges you could face for theft, financial exploitation of a dependent minor fraud, and emotional abuse. It details the civil lawsuits I can bring for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of funds, emotional distress, and financial damages. It includes estimated penalties, legal fees, and the likelihood of conviction based on the evidence I have. I let that sink in, watching my father's face change as he realized how serious this was. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm and cold. "You are going to repay every single dollar you stole, with interest, 10% per annum calculated from the date of each deposit. That brings the total to approximately $40,000. "We don't have that kind of money," my mother wailed. "Then you'll sell what you bought with it," I said mercilessly. "The car goes first. The jewelry gets returned or sold. The cruise gets canceled and refunded. The furniture, the electronics, everything you purchased with Maya's money gets liquidated to pay the debt." "You can't force us to do that," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, I can. Because if you don't agree to my terms right now, right here in front of everyone, I will have the police here within the hour. I will press criminal charges. I will file a civil lawsuit. I will make sure every person you know, everyone at your church, everyone you work with, everyone in this entire town knows exactly what you did. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your name will be synonymous with child abuse and theft, and you will still end up paying back every penny plus legal fees plus damages plus possible jail time." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "So I suggest you take the option I'm giving you now. We can handle this privately with a legal agreement spelling out exactly how and when you'll repay the money. Miss a single payment breach, a single term, and everything I just threatened becomes reality." The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. My father was breathing hard, his face still red, his hands clenched into fists. My mother was crying, mascara running down her face. Aunt Susan was watching them with disgust and disappointment written clearly across her features. Finally, my father spoke. "Fine, we'll pay it back. We'll sell the car, cancel the cruise, whatever you want." "Not whatever I want," I corrected. "What's legally and morally required, and there's more. Custody of Maya is being transferred entirely to me, effective immediately. You'll have no legal authority over her whatsoever. Visitation will be at her discretion only. If she never wants to see you again, that's her choice, and you will respect it." I turned to Beth, who had been trying to make herself invisible throughout this entire confrontation. "And you, Beth, let's talk about your role in all this." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "I swear I didn't know how bad it was." "Really?" I walked over to her, my voice soft and deadly. "You didn't know? Then please explain the diamond bracelet you're trying to hide under the table right now, the one that cost $3,000. Money that should have bought my daughter a laptop for school, money that should have paid for her soccer fees and field trips and new clothes." I grabbed her wrist, not roughly but firmly, and pulled her arm up onto the table, displaying the bracelet. "Where did you get this, Beth?" "Mom and Dad gave it to me for my birthday," she stammered. "I didn't know where they got the money." "Yes, you did. I have recordings of you and Mom talking in the kitchen. We need to be careful. Alex isn't stupid. Remember saying that you knew. You knew something was wrong and you chose to benefit from it anyway rather than ask questions or speak up." Beth's face crumpled. "I'll give it back. I'll return it, I swear." "You're damn right you will," I said. "In fact, you're going to do more than that. You're going to write a check for the full value of every gift they gave you this year that was purchased with Maya's money. The bracelet, the purse, the watch, the cash they gave you for your car payment in June. All of it. And if you don't, you'll be named in the lawsuit as an accessory after the fact for knowingly receiving stolen property." "That's not fair," Beth cried. "I didn't steal anything." "No, you just accepted the proceeds of theft and helped cover it up. That's called being an accessory, and it's a crime, too." Aunt Susan cleared her throat. She had been reading through the legal documents, her face growing darker with each page. "Alex is right," she said firmly. "Beth, you either pay back what you received or you face legal consequences. Thomas, Martha, you either agree to Alex's terms right now, or I'll personally make sure everyone in this family and this community knows what you did. You've brought shame on this family, and you'll spend the rest of your lives making it right." My father looked around the table at the faces of his family. Some were angry, some were shocked, some were disgusted. No one was on his side. He deflated his shoulders, slumping, and nodded. "Fine, we agree. We'll pay it back." "Good," I said. "Tomorrow morning, we're meeting with my attorney and a notary to sign the repayment agreement. It will include a detailed schedule of payments, interest calculations, penalties for late payments, and consequences for non-compliance. You'll both sign it, it will be legally binding, and you'll spend the next 2 years making this right." I looked around at my family, at the shocked and appalled faces, and felt a grim satisfaction. "I didn't want to do this publicly. I wanted to give you a chance to make it right privately. But you would have weaseled out of it, made excuses, tried to manipulate the situation. So everyone needed to see. Everyone needed to know. And now they do." I pulled Maya up from her chair and wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "We're leaving now. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 for the meeting with the attorney. I suggest you spend tonight figuring out how you're going to liquidate assets to start paying back what you stole." As I walked toward the door with Maya, Aunt Susan called out, "Alex, wait." She came over and hugged me tight, then Maya. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "You protected your daughter. That's what a real parent does." We left to the sound of chaos erupting behind us, voices raised in argument and accusation. I didn't look back. I had said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. Now it was time to focus on healing and moving forward. The next morning, my parents sat in a conference room with Captain Torres, a notary, and myself. They had aged overnight, their faces drawn and haggard. The process took 4 hours. Captain Torres was merciless, explaining every clause of the agreement in detail, making sure they understood exactly what they were signing. The car would be sold within 30 days, with the proceeds going directly toward the debt. The cruise was already canceled. The refund of $7,000 applied immediately. All jewelry would be returned where possible or sold for cash. Beth had written a check for $8,000 that morning, covering what she had received. My parents would pay the remaining balance of $20,000 in monthly installments of $2,000 over 10 months with 10% interest. If they missed a single payment, the full amount would become due immediately, and I could pursue legal action. They signed. 34 pages of legal documentation binding them to repay what they had stolen. Beth signed a separate agreement acknowledging her receipt of stolen property and her agreement to make restitution. When it was over, my mother tried to approach me, tears streaming down her face. "Alex, please, you have to understand." "No," I said flatly. "I don't have to understand anything. You stole from your granddaughter. You lied to her, manipulated her, made her feel worthless. There's nothing to understand beyond that." "But we're your parents," she sobbed. "We raised you." "And that's what makes this so much worse," I said. "You knew better. You knew what it felt like to love a child, to want the best for them, and you chose to betray that trust for material possessions. That's unforgivable." I walked out without looking back, Maya's hand in mine. The weeks and months that followed were healing ones. Maya and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near my new base assignment, bright and airy with big windows and a view of a park. We painted her room together, and I let her choose everything from the sunny yellow on the walls to the new furniture to the curtains. I bought her a desk for studying, shelves for her books, a new laptop, everything she needed. We went shopping, and I told her to pick out anything she wanted. At first, she was hesitant, reaching for clearance racks out of habit, but gradually she relaxed. We filled her closet with new clothes, bought her proper shoes, replaced everything she had been making do with. I took her to the pawn shop where she had sold her father's necklace and bought it back for triple what they had paid her, and I fastened it around her neck where it belonged. "You never have to sell this again," I told her. "This is yours. It's part of your dad, and nobody can ever take it away from you." I found her a therapist, Dr. Lisa Chin, who specialized in helping teens process trauma and family betrayal. The first few sessions were hard. Maya was resistant to talking about her feelings, but Dr. Chin was patient and kind. Slowly, Maya opened up about the guilt she had carried, the shame of wearing worn-out clothes, the exhaustion of working so many hours, the betrayal of realizing her grandparents had lied to her. It took months, but I watched my daughter heal. Her grades came back up to their previous level. She made the high school honor roll in her first semester. She joined the soccer team and scored the winning goal in her first tournament. She made new friends, went to movies and bowling, and all the normal teenage activities she had missed. She laughed more, smiled more, stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. My parents made their payments, though. Each one came with a bitter phone call from my father about how I was destroying them financially, how they'd had to downsize to a smaller house, how they'd had to give up their comfortable lifestyle. I never wavered. "You destroyed yourselves," I told him every time. "I'm just holding you accountable." Aunt Susan kept me updated on family news. My parents' reputation in the community had taken a massive hit. Word had gotten out about what they'd done, and people who had once admired them now avoided them. My mother was no longer invited to her book club. My father resigned from the church council. They had to sell their house and move to a modest apartment because they couldn't afford the mortgage while making restitution payments. Beth and I never spoke again. I heard through family channels that her husband had been furious when he found out about her role in the situation and their marriage was strained. She had tried to reach out several times, leaving voicemails and sending texts that I never answered. She had made her choices, and now she lived with them. Exactly 1 year later, I sat in the auditorium of Maya's high school as they announced she had won a full academic scholarship to a prestigious summer program for gifted students at MIT. My daughter, my brave, brilliant daughter, stood on that stage accepting her award with her head held high, her voice steady as she gave a short speech thanking her teachers and friends. I cried, tears of pride and joy streaming down my face as I watched her. She had not only survived what my parents had done to her, she had thrived. She was stronger, more confident, more aware of her own worth than ever before. After the ceremony, as we walked out to the parking lot, I saw them. My parents sitting in the very back row, almost hidden in the shadows. They looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. My mother's hair had gone almost completely gray. My father's face was lined with new wrinkles that hadn't been there a year ago. They watched Maya with expressions that might have been regret, might have been longing, but definitely included the bitter knowledge of what they had lost. Maya saw them too. She hesitated for just a moment, her hand tightening in mine, and I felt her tense. Then she lifted her chin, straightened her shoulders, and kept walking. She didn't wave. She didn't acknowledge them. She had made her choice about what role they would play in her life, and that role was nothing. That night, we celebrated with ice cream sundaes in our little apartment, drowning them in hot fudge and whipped cream and cherries. Maya told me about the summer program, about the classes she'd take, and the experiments she'd conduct, and the college students she'd meet. She was excited, animated, full of plans and dreams for her future. "Mom," she said as we were cleaning up, her voice suddenly serious. "Thank you for fighting for me, for not letting them get away with it, for showing me that I deserved better." "Always, baby," I told her, pulling her into a hug. "I will always fight for you. That's what real family does. Real family doesn't steal from you or lie to you or make you feel like a burden. Real family lifts you up, protects you, and loves you unconditionally." She nodded against my shoulder, and I knew she understood. My parents had taught her what family shouldn't be, but I was teaching her what it should be, and that was a lesson worth more than $36,000. Trust once broken might never fully heal, but from those shattered pieces you can build something stronger, something more authentic. A family built not on lies and selfishness, but on truth and the courage to face it head on. My daughter learned that she was worth fighting for, that her value wasn't determined by others' opinions, and that standing up for yourself isn't just acceptable, it's necessary. Would you have done the same in my situation, or would you have tried to keep the peace? Have you ever had to stand up against family for what was right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about standing up for yourself and the people you love. Your support means the world to us.